point out a few others that we will not get to, at least in this, this session or for this year. We talked a little bit months ago about the Hagar-Sarah text and the Abraham text. And that could easily have been in this series that we consider texts of terror because of what happened with Hagar and the manner in which she was treated. And these situations, and I'll recap here very quickly, but these situations almost always have ripple effects. Whose idea, by the way, this is not a rhetorical question, when I taught my students at the university, and I would ask a question, invariably they treated all of my questions as rhetorical questions, where I'm not expecting an answer. So I have to remind them, these are not rhetorical questions. Whose idea was for Abraham to have a child with Hagar? Sarah. Is there any confusion about that? No. Okay? Now, and out of that, we have, of course, the son Ishmael, okay? Which in Hebrew, and I think it's important, Ishmael is named by God. Later on, Isaac will be named by Sarah and Abraham. And Ishmael means, in Hebrew, God listens or God hears. That's what the word means. Later on, Isaac would be born, okay? Sarah is about 90. Abraham is about 100. And I know we read this and we can only conclude, wow, okay? Or, what a guy, okay? Or whatever conclusion you may want. But Isaac comes out of that relationship. And Isaac, as you know, is the sort of the anglicized version of the Hebrew name Yitzhak, as in, it's a very common Jewish name, in fact, as in Yitzhak Rabin, for example, former Prime Minister of Israel. And it literally means laughter, or he laughs. And Sarah famously said, my son has been born, and everyone will laugh with me, that is, with joy. And I wanted to put in a little note at the bottom of the page that says, see below, not everyone will laugh with you, okay? Because ultimately, Sarah would look out of sort of, it says she saw, but I envision her looking out of the window and seeing these two brothers playing. And famously, the text says what? She looked out and she saw that the brothers were playing, and it triggered something in her. And she said, I cannot allow this to happen. And tells Abraham, get rid of your son. This is horrific stuff. We should never read this story and simply move on as if somehow this is the way it always is. It should always give us pause, and we should always ask, what exactly happened here? And what do you think happened here? If you had to sort of extrapolate just on the basis of what the text says, which is what, by the way, I'm sorry to sort of burst any bubble, which is what interpreters do. We interpret the text, and we come to 100 different conclusions. Okay? What do you think she saw?
Some sexual thing. Well, threat to legacy.
Threat to legacy? I can't have this. He cannot be inheriting with my son. Right? Get rid of him. And what does Abraham do? He gets rid of him and with Hagar. And when you read the text, you discover how absolutely terrible it is as they head into the wilderness, okay? And it is such a poignant, heartbreaking moment when Hagar has to make the decision, which I hope none of us ever, ever, ever in our wildest dreams would have to make. And that is, there is no water, they're in the wilderness, and she sees that her son is going to die. And she has to make the decision, am I going to stay with him right here and watch him die? Or, as she decides, I have to step away a little distance because I cannot bear to see my son die, sitting next to him. Somewhere along the line, I'll knock this over. I'm just warning you right now, okay? And then, of course, God speaks to her. Okay? We can stop that text right there, and there is no way that we can read this narrative and not conclude this is a story of terror. But when the text goes on, right, and psychologists or interpreters with a psychological impulse have concluded, Abraham is a man who has attachment problems. Because later on, of course, he's going to have that with Isaac as well. But what happens after this text is what God says to Hagar. Water will be provided, you will be safe, your son will be safe, and he is described. Now, I'm really going to put you on the spot here. There's a phrase that describes Ishmael after that he will become what? And I quote, so you don't think I'm just making this up. He is described as becoming, and I quote, a wild ass of a man. End of quote. Okay. By the way, this is why these adult forums are not for kids. Okay. And so I'm going to choose one word out of that phrase. It's not the one you're thinking. Okay. I'm going to choose the word wild. And you hear that, and you might wonder, what does that mean? So, again, I'm asking you, what might you conclude that wild means in that context? Unconventional? Unconventional? Angry? And I have to tell you, my opinion has changed. The first time, well, actually several times when I read that text, and I've written about it, I concluded that while there might have to do with anger, out of control kind of thing, but in rethinking this a little bit over the years, I've come to a different conclusion about wild. Wild could also mean what? Free. Roaming in a natural habitat. Maybe Ishmael will become precisely what his mother could never be, who was enslaved, and he will be free, as in wild. It's possible. So I'm giving that example because that could be a text of terror. Obviously, the sacrifice, quote, binding of Isaac could be a text of terror. Obviously, the whole story of Lot, you know that story, right? It's absolutely horrific. And this is the clashing of, I want to be hospitable, but hospitality cannot somehow be defined by being hostile, which is what he does with his daughter. when you know full well, right? You know full well that the men who have surrounded your house, we are told all of the men of the city, and you think, well, you know what? I'm going to appease these men. And he describes them as what? Do not do such a wicked thing. He describes them as wicked and then proceeds to say, however, take my 2 daughters, neither of whom have ever known a man. It's horrific. Lot is not going to be running for the Father of the Year here. It's terrible stuff. And then we have Judah and Tamar. And these are stories, by the way, all of the stories I'm telling you right now is in the book of Genesis. We could be stuck in Genesis for a lifetime. Judah is the father-in-law of Tamar. Tamar is married to his oldest son, who dies. They have no children. And Tamar says, essentially, I'm invoking the idea that your next of kin should be my husband. And the next of kin is his brother. And Judah says, essentially, you've already killed one of my sons. I am not going to let this happen, right? And hides his son. Tamar, by the way, if you're looking for a hero/heroine, Tamar is your girl. She is great. Tamar decides, I'm not thinking no for an answer. I'm going to set up my father-in-law. By the way, are you familiar with this story? No. Why would you be? This is not the Old Testament text in worship is from the Tamar story. No. And she decides, quote, I'm not making this up, that she will dress up, if you will, and pose as, quote, a prostitute. Right? It's the American love story right here. She will pose, and by the way, when you read these translations, it's just great. They try so hard. Some of the translations are just in your face, right? And they will use the word, again, white kids are not in the study, the word like whore. But then some translations, because we're just proper, would say harlot. Okay? In this case, it's prostitute. And she dresses up as a prostitute, or take your pick. And she sets herself in, geographically speaking, in a place where Judah would see her. Are you tracking with me? And of course, Judah sees her and says, well, hello. By the way, that's just my footnote. And he, what? Essentially petitions her. Is that the right word? Propositions. And she agrees. And they, well, I don't know the name of the hotel in Jerusalem, but somewhere. Meanwhile, by the way, Tamar has a plan. Keep in mind now, this is her plan. Nothing happens. Well, actually, something does happen because they sleep together. And Tamar becomes pregnant. Remember the line from David and Bathsheba? I am pregnant, and the whole story changes. Tamar is pregnant. And her father-in-law, Judah, is, what do you think his reaction is? I'm asking you now, take a wild guess. His reaction is, how could you? I cannot believe that my daughter-in-law went out and slept with some man and became pregnant. And he brings it to the elders to judge her. And she says to him, I'm, of course, interpreting now, says to him, okay, but before you do that, do you recognize this little signet here? And he said, yes. And she said, he says, yes, it's mine. And she says, yes, it is yours. This is what you left in the room with me when I became pregnant. Okay. This, again, is a story in Genesis, right? And it points, obviously, to a very sordid kind of understanding of what the role of, let's say, the next of kin should be. And Judah, the father-in-law, essentially takes advantage in his own sordid life with his daughter-in-law and becomes pregnant, and then does what? Blames her. Except, of course, she says, oh, by the way, this little cord that I have here, it belongs to the one with whom I slept. It's yours. Okay? So easy with the self-righteous stuff. We have a whole series of these stories. A whole series. So what I'm getting at is this. What I've chosen is a glimpse into stories that by any definition are stories of terror. Horrible stories. Now, one of the things that I will leave you with is this. Why do we have such stories in the Bible? By the way, you might be sitting thinking, okay, here comes the answer. Half of the time, I have no idea. I really don't. Okay. So here is one such story. We can keep the lights on if that's right. This story is from Judges 19. And the story begins, importantly to note, in those days when there was no king in Israel, what happens? What happens to the moral fabric of a society, of a community, when there is no one to lead? You take responsibility for your own. And by the way, it's one thing to have literally, physically, no king. It's one thing on the one hand. On the other hand, you may also have a king slash leader who is in power, who, by the way, has set no example of how we should function. But I digress. What happens when there's no leader?
The society disintegrates.
The society disintegrates. There is chaos.
But there will always be leaders. People will always choose their leaders. There may not be bosses or kings under a legal structure. People will always, any group of people, they'll look to someone.
It's true. And not everyone, not in every society are leaders chosen. Some.
Bosses are assigned, for apologies to Jefferson, leadership is derived from the consent of the led.
Okay. So we have leaders. Some in power, but we also have vacuums, even when leaders are in power. And here, a certain Levite residing in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim took himself a concubine. Now, here's the thing. Those folks who translate make an interpretive decision as to what words will be used. You don't have to take my word for it. When you have some time and you're bored and you have nothing else to do with your life, okay, as is the case with me, just spread out about 10 different English translations of any text, particularly ones that, sort of like this, and see what words are used. I wouldn't be surprised that you have 10 different words, because choices are made. There's that old story, mostly obviously apocryphal, it's a joke, where in the early days, right, all of the manuscripts, of course, are written by hand, right? We have scribes. By the way, do you believe mistakes were made?
Yes.
I will only correct you once. Not most likely, absolutely. Okay? And the reason we know that, we have evidence of it. Let me give you an example. Had I thought about it ahead of time, I'd have brought a copy of this to show to you. The first edition of the New Revised Standard Bible, the one that we use, right, which I still believe is one of the best translations out there, published by Oxford University Press, had errors in it. One was a misspelling, and one was what we call haplography, right? You're reading along, and all of a sudden, you realize that the text makes no sense because 2 lines later is where it continues. Okay? Sometimes you copy and paste and it ends up in the wrong place, right? By the way, I have that edition. Okay? It's marked up, but I have it. So this is not, it could happen. It does happen, and this is today, in this day and age, where the word Pharaoh is misspelled. Okay. Now, I'm saying all of that because there's an old story where a scribe is in his scriptorium copying, the text, and his leader comes down and looks at what he's doing and is shocked and says, no, the word is not celibate, it's celebrate. Okay? And everything changes. Okay? Depends on what you decide to translate. So it says here, he took to himself a concubine. And the word that is used there is the word in Hebrew for woman. Now think of the difference that it would make, right? But instead, the moment we read concubine, and one translation actually says mistress, right? So it all depends. Anyone who says we do not bring who we are to the reading and translation of a text is living in some kind of cuckoo world. We do. We do. There is no such thing as an objective translation. We bring who we are. And this text does. This translation does. So we are told that he took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Now keep in mind, this is not, I'm just alerting you to something. You will never hear the name of this woman in this story. And it's a reminder of the sort of the path of this story in ensuring that the woman remains anonymous, a nobody. Because the moment you give a name, there is something very personal about it. But his concubine became very angry with him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem. By the way, literally, concubare, which is where the word concubine comes from. Literally, it means, we know what con means, right? We have those con words all the time. Not cons the way you're thinking, crooks, not those cons. Con, of course, meaning with, right? Cubare literally is a Latin phrase that means to lie with. So a concubine is someone with whom you lie. That's what it means. And we are told that she became angry with him, and she left, which is really, actually, think about this. This is a remarkable thing, because here's a person whose identity, by the way, is clearly tied to this person. And we don't know why she became angry, but angry enough to walk away and go back to her father's house. Then her husband set out after her to speak tenderly to her and to bring her back.
Well, now he's the husband.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting?
How special. Because the word that is used for her is the word, Hebrew word, for woman, occasionally translated wife. The word that is used for the man is the Hebrew word for man, occasionally translated husband. But when it refers to her, she's a concubine. When it refers to him, it's her husband. Now, this is not, I know we're very familiar with, in the beginning God created, right? And then there is the man, and the word that is used in Hebrew there, which is a very inclusive word. It's sadly, not because you and I don't do this, because we're enlightened, but folks out there think of that word as a gender-specific word. It isn't, okay? The word that is used there, which has come, is given rise to the name Adam, is Adam, which is an inclusive word that has to do with humanity, humankind. In fact, one scholar, and I might say a brilliant scholar, Phyllis Tribble, who was at Union Seminary in New York for many, many years, and translated it. It never caught on. She's trying to get away from the whole man thing. She translated it, you ready? Earthling. All right, it never caught on. But Phyllis Tribble was on to something. Because the word for earth is Adamah, okay, which sounds like the feminine version of Adam, but it's not the feminine version. It's an interesting twist. The Adam came from the Adamah. So, as crazy as Earthling sounds as if it's some part of E.T., okay, and it never caught on, not surprisingly, right? It actually captures the inclusive nature of the word. That's not the word that is used here. The word that is used here for man is the Hebrew word ish. And the word that is used here for woman is isha. Okay? That's the masculine and the feminine version of this word. But again, depends who translates, will guide how we think about this story. Immediately when you think of the woman, right, she is characterized as, well, a mistress, a concubine. But when you think of the man, he is the husband. And with that should be some rights. What do you think the rights are? Right. But he said, you know what? She went to her father's house, and every time I read this, this is why sometimes we can dwell on verses for a long time. She goes to her father's house because she's angry, right? So does he go after her immediately? No. Why would you do such a thing? In fact, you wait for how long? 4 months, according to the text. Right? After 4 months, he decided to go after her and speak to her how? Tenderly. Tenderly. And by the way, it doesn't quite explain what that means, but let me help you contextualize it. The word tender in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, across the board, is actually the word that means heart in Hebrew. If you are going to speak tenderly, you have to speak from the heart. There is no getting around it. You remember the Latin word for heart, which, by the way, we know, okay? That gives us the English word creed, right? You know, we all have a creed. We know about the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and the Athanasian Creed, which we never use. But even if we didn't know that it's connected with the word creed, we know other words that actually we're all somewhat afraid of because we don't ever want to have a cardiac arrest. It's the same word, cardiac, cordial, cardo, you know, the road that runs through many cities in the Middle East. They discovered one not that long ago in Jerusalem, okay? And it was called a cardo because it ran through the heart of the city. And we have come to believe that creed begins with what? I believe. Or in the Nicene Creed, it begins what? From the Council of Nicaea, we believe. But if you believe, as he does, that he wants to bring her back home to himself, right? It has to come from the heart. So when you and I, which I imagine perhaps we still do, we actually write letters and spell out words and use ink and paper, you know, those all quaint things now, and we sign off cordially. What we're saying, from my heart. That's what it means. And so he's going to go and bring her back, speaking tenderly. He's going to speak from his heart to her and bring her back. So here is what it says, to bring her back. It makes sense, right? 4 months, so who's keeping track? The Hebrew there, we used to have a board here, right? The Hebrew there is a word that is pronounced, you don't have to know this, because I'll repeat it many times later on, when you least expect it. I'm sitting in church. The Hebrew word that is used here is the word shuv. Okay? If you had to spell it out, it would be S-H-U-B. Because sometimes in Hebrew, the B and the V is the same letter or the same sound. Shuv. Why is this word important? It is in Hebrew the most common word that means to return. Stay with me, okay? It is also the word that is most commonly translated repent. So repentance means you're making a U-turn. You're not taking an exit here. You're turning around. That's the word that is used here. So one is left to wonder, I will speak tenderly to her and bring her back, or I will speak tenderly to her and she will repent. After all, she left. Now, that seems too dramatic in a way, right? But one can also begin to understand why the husband, the man, might feel that way. Because after all, right, she is a concubine who has come and lived with him and now has gone back to her father. He's going to bring her back home. Maybe. Yeah.
Oh, am I thinking that loudly? I was thinking that also, why do you have a concubine at all? You have a concubine for two reasons. Produce heirs and to enhance the workforce without taking a second wife. So the 4 months is also the second trimester. Okay, I'm just saying, right? So she has left the house and she has not fulfilled the obligations to extend the workforce nor to provide for the family. He's waited 4 months to confirm that. And now he's going back to ask the question, speaking nicely, hey, our deal really wasn't completed.
And if I could speak on her behalf, it is, we didn't have a deal. Okay? No, I mean,
Does that come with the concubine status?
right, her concubine status. But again, it could be for economic reasons. It could be for, quote, not to be crude about this, to produce offsprings, right? But she left. And how could you possibly leave without? Now, is it possible that the 4 months could have to do with, trimesters? Sure. Do we know that? This is why we have, right. This is why we, by the way, just for the record, let me go back for a second to illustrate how difficult some of this is. Let me go back to Sarah and Hagar. And I'm going to ask you right now to make a justifiable argument why Sarah would do what she did to Ishmael and Hagar. How could you justify that? No, I'm asking you, if you had to justify it, what argument would you make?
So, Hagar was Egyptian.
Yes.
Okay, and there's a long history, whether we have a famine, let's go to Egypt and get wheat. I don't have children, let's go to Egypt and get a baby. Tamar was Canaanite, so she wasn't Israelite, okay? So there's a long history of, I will harvest from the non-Israel nations, because I am, of course, the chosen people, and this is my promised land. I will harvest from the non-Israel nations, and after I've harvested, what do we do with the field that has been harvested?
Okay. I still am.
By
Right, I'm still looking for a justification.
Well, that's a
Right.
I think Sarah, in her mind, could justify it, but like, it was my idea for Hagar to sleep with Abraham, and that shouldn't have happened, it was my fault, so I'm gonna get rid of her, because, I mean, he only exists because of me.
Right. But again, we have several instances, by the way, in the Old Testament where it is the child that pays for the actions of the parents. And we have even a kind of a saying from the book of Jeremiah, famously, who said, "The parents have eaten sour grapes, and it's the children's teeth that are set on edge." Okay? We have consequences here. We know famously, I think one of the most horrific things is the first child born to David and Bathsheba. What happened with that child? That child suffered for 8 days and then died. And we are told, because of what you have done, your child will suffer and died. Right? Now, what I'm getting at is that if we want to justify, we can think of all kinds of arguments here. I feel terrible, but really, do I want to kick this kid out and the mother? Even if we know the history, if you know, and again, one rabbi, in interpreting this text, drew the conclusion that the older brother was sexually abusing his younger brother and therefore had to leave. This, by the way, is in writing. Now, if that were the case, would you say that Sarah is justified? You might draw the conclusion that, well, given that, right? And that's the point. The point is, you're looking for something that is so egregious that you have no choice but to come to this conclusion, except for one slight problem. Not true. Right? The text says in Hebrew that the brothers were Yitzhaking. That's not a word, by the way. Okay? The word that is using is the word Yitzhak. The brothers were laughing together. That's the Hebrew word there. I'm not passionate about this stuff. That's what the brothers were doing. They were laughing together. That's the name of Isaac. So when we speak about translations, it really does matter, because it leads us in maybe certain trajectories of interpretation. Well, after all, I mean, if he was abusing his brother, what's a mother to do? Except for one slight problem. It's not what the text says. They were laughing. And, of course, we can't have that. I mean, after all, why would I want my son laughing with his brother? I have to put a stop to this. And, of course, it says inheritance and legacy and so on. But I go back to the text. So he had with him a servant, a couple of donkeys. When he reached her father's house, the girl's father saw him and came with joy to meet him. Keep track of who is conspicuously absent from all of this. His father-in-law, the girl's father, okay, where's her identity here? Okay. The girl's father made him stay, and he remained with him for 3 days. They ate and drank, and he stayed there. So we have to ask the question, as we will see in this story, when does invitation becomes coercion? See if you pick up on something here. So he stayed for 3 days, and what we are told, okay, the two guys ate and drank and had a good time. By the way, where's the concubine? On the fourth day, he got up early in the morning and he prepared to go, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, look at how the whole relationship sort of situation is crafted here. Fortify yourself with a bit of food, and after that you may go. Don't rush out. It's early. Grab a bite. Strengthen yourself, and then you may go. So the two men sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, you know what? Why not spend the night and enjoy yourself? This is day 4. Again, who is conspicuously absent here? Right? When the man got up to go, his father-in-law kept urging him until he spent the night. Keep track. When does invitation becomes coercion? Right? When you begin to say, no, 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 you're urging, stay for another night. Eat and drink. On the 5th day, he got up early in the morning to leave. The girl's father said, fortify yourself. Sounds familiar? So they lingered until the day declined, and the two of them ate and drank. The guys. When the man and his concubine and his servant got up to leave, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, look, the day has worn on until it is now evening. Day after day after day after day, not by invitation anymore. Come on now. Stay. Urging. Spend the night. See, the day has drawn to a close. Spend the night here. Enjoy yourself. Tomorrow you can get up early in the morning and your journey, and you can go home. But the man would not spend the night. He got up and departed and arrived opposite Jerusalem, opposite Jebus. He had with him a couple of saddle donkeys, and his concubine was with him. I mean, look at the language here. I'm all ready to go. I've packed up. I got my couple of donkeys here. And oh, by the way, my concubine is with me as well. When they were near, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, come now, let us turn aside to the city and spend the night here. But his master said to him, we will not turn aside into a city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel. Can do. We can't stay in a city of foreigners. Take that home for a moment and try to unpack. I cannot stay in a city of foreigners, and you can extrapolate because, of course, they can't be what? They can't be trusted. Who knows what they will do? We've got, can't, no. And again, for us to be reminded, Elimelech, you remember Elimelech? I know, it's not the name that comes to mind. But Elimelech, of course, is the husband of Naomi. And they had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And there was a famine, ironically, in the city of Bethlehem, which of course means what? Right? House of bread. So the house of bread had no food, so they went to the one place that Israelites were told you should not enter this land. In fact, don't even go around it. And that place was Moab. And it was in Moab that they found food, and they found community, that both husbands were married to Orpah and to Ruth. You know the rest of the story. So when we hear this, you can't trust the foreigners, right? Ding, ding. But we will continue to give you. Then he said to his servant, come, let us reach out to one of these places, spend the night there. So they passed and went on their way, and the sun went down near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. So we're getting into, sort of comfortable territory here. They turned aside there to go and spend the night in Gibeah. They went in and sat down in the open square, but no one took them in. Isn't this wonderful, right? We're going among our own because we can't trust the foreigners, but no one took them in. Then at evening, there was an old man coming from his work in the field. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was residing there. When the old man looked up and saw the wayfarer, the old square in the city, he said, where are you going and where do you come from? By the way, it's the great sort of bracketing of human existence. Where have you come from and where are you going? That's it. He answered them, we are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim from where I come. And I'm going to my home. No one has offered to take me in. We, your servants, have straw and fodder for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and the woman and the young man. We need nothing more. The old man said, peace be with you. I will care for all of your wants. Just do not spend the night in the square. So he brought him into the house and fed the donkeys. They washed their feet and ate and drank. When they were enjoying themselves, the men of the city, a depraved lot. Euphemisms are such great. A depraved lot surrounded the house, started pounding on the door, and they said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house, pardon me, so that we may have intercourse with him. The word that is used here in Hebrew means to know. And that's come down into our sort of culture. X is trying to get to know, quote unquote, wink wink, right? This is in a way where it comes from. The Jewish Publication Society says, so that we could be intimate with him. An older translation says, so that we would get to know him. The New Revised Standard Version is explicit. It's an interpretation here. And the man said, the master of the house went out to them and said, here we go. No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Here's why this is important. The man of the house knows that the people who have surrounded his house are seeking to do what? Acting wickedly. They are not there as the hospitality group to welcome. And he calls them my brothers. Guys, we know each other. Don't act so wickedly. It's kind of bad form. Since this man is my guest, he proceeds to say, do not do such a vile thing. We have in one verse a description of the men as wicked and attempting to do something vile. And I want for us to keep that in mind, because then the master of the house says, instead of doing that, take my virgin daughter and the concubine, and according to this text, it says, and I will read it, bring them out now, okay, and do whatever you want with them, but don't do to this man such a vile thing. Do whatever you want with them. The Hebrew there, by the way, is, if you take the Hebrew word as literal as possible, it means ravish. Take these take my virgin daughter who has never known a man, they want to be explicit, and the concubine, and ravish them. But the men would not listen to him, so the man seized his concubine and pushed her out to them. And one should not be surprised, they wantonly raped and abused her all through the night until the morning. And when dawn broke, they let her go. As the morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. You can't see this. In the morning, the master got up, opened the door, and when he went out on his way, there was the concubine lying at the doorstep with her hands on the threshold. When you have a moment, pull up some of the great artists' rendering of this, and you will see the depiction by various artists. And what does he say? Get up. We're going. She has been pushed out of the house by the master to the men of the city who raped her all night long and then let her go when dawn was breaking. And she came and collapsed at the doorstep. And he opens the door, and there are two statements that he makes. Get up, we are going. You can take that as you wish, but there is no way to interpret those statements as concern, as care, as anything but what it says. But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man set out for his home. And this text ends in a way that I've never been able to quite fathom or understand. When he had entered his house, he took a knife, and grasping his concubine, he cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. Then he commanded the men whom he sent, saying, thus you shall say to all Israel, has anything like this ever happened? Of course, with good reason, we will never hear the Old Testament text for the reading of this morning in worship is from Judges 19. No, with good reason. Now, scholars struggle with the ending of this text. But here is what I struggle with in addition to that. What do you think? Was the concubine alive or dead when he threw her on the donkey and cut her up? Actually, we don't know, right? We don't know. Which one, by the way, I'm going to ask a ridiculous question. Which one is preferable? Right. We don't know. She collapsed. He grabbed her, threw her across the donkey, and then later on cut her up. I'm sorry that you have to go into summer with that image. But these are texts of terror that we don't hear about, we don't talk about, and we have to leave and wonder, why are they in the Bible? What's the point? And we have to struggle with that. I want to make one quick announcement. We're off in the summer, with one exception. In June, on June 16th and the 23rd, I think those are the two Sundays, 22nd. Okay, so it'd be 15th and the 22nd. I don't want to show up my math skills here, but right. Those two Sundays, we're going to have a special sort of two-session on 15th, 22nd. On text, there are 6 texts within the Bible that deal with the really challenging idea of homosexuality, broadly construed, okay? The so-called clobber texts. And how do we read these texts? How do we understand these texts? What do they mean for us? By the way, at the end of the day, what we just went through and these texts to come are part of Scripture. We don't get to have, I know some people feel we should have a canon within a canon. We don't get to do that. Those are folks who don't want to deal with difficult things. But we have to deal with difficult things. The next text that I was about to do today, which of course I knew I would never get to, is the text of Dinah, who is raped by Shechem, who convinces his father, I kind of like her anyway, can you arrange for a marriage? And the brothers of Dinah decided, what you have done to my sister cannot go. But it turns out they're not seeking justice. They're seeking what? Revenge, which is a whole different way of taking care of their sister. And it becomes all about them. All right. We have to stop there. Yeah,
Just
Ramesh.
wanted to ask Francis wanted everyone to know that they're serving food upstairs, I think in Shepherd's Hall, and everyone's welcome.
By the way, this is what happens when you're in the basement and we have been relegated to the darkness of a dungeon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.